I can see that Natalia just joined us. Can you hear me, Natalia?
Yeah, I can hear you well. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. We're just
Good.
waiting for 2 more speakers to arrive, so we'll wait a couple of minutes.
Perfect. Perfect.
But
Good.
great to see you both.
Hello.
Okay. Okay, I think we might be starting in a minute. We're still waiting for one more online speaker, but we're going to be talking to her a little bit later. So I guess if everyone takes their seats. Thank you. All right. Okay, so let's begin. My name is Victoria Ball. I'm the main organizer of this event. I am representing a youth climate initiative from Ukraine called Rozvi. Rozvi is a fairly new Ukrainian youth climate initiative, but we focus on just transitions to sustainable energy and sustainable food, and particularly focusing on the green reconstruction of Ukraine. Because as we know, civil society is already leading the way in these green recovery projects. They are not just post-war processes, but already ongoing. They are engaging international support and so on. And as we know, the food system is crucial in achieving our goals of the Paris Agreement of keeping within 1.5 degrees of global warming. Food systems contribute to a third of global emissions, and this is very often overlooked. They also are crucial in achieving a full fossil fuel phase out, because a fifth of the energy emissions come from the food sector. And something that is really often not included in these discussions is the public health perspective on food systems transformation. This is, as we know, that diet-related health risks are increasing. The inequalities to do with access to food, and especially healthy and nutritious food, are widening. And we also see that the costs to our health systems in terms of how expensive it is to treat these diet-related diseases are rising. And in fact, something like over 7 billion euros per year is the cost of these health impacts. Not to mention, the climate impacts of global warming that are associated with the food that we eat. Eastern Europe is a region that is dealing with a lot of different crises, a lot of different challenges, and namely the war in my home country in Ukraine, which is not just affecting the food and agricultural systems and production nationally, but also across the whole region. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, and the solutions that different sort of sectors can implement and different stakeholders can contribute in order for a just and effective transition of our food systems. So I think I will start by introducing our first speaker. It's Natalia Mamonova. Natalia works with the Ruralis Institute for Rural and Regional Research in Norway. Her research focuses on rural politics, agrarian transformation, social movements, food sovereignty, and the influence of right-wing populism in post-socialist rural Europe. She holds a PhD degree from Erasmus University in the Netherlands, and since then, she has been working as a researcher in various different academic institutions, including the University of Oxford. She is currently involved in research at the Ruralis Institute focused on the impact of war in Ukraine and on the global food systems. So, Natalia, can you hear us well?
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, amazingly. So just make sure that you speak loudly and clearly so our audience can hear you well. And first of all, as someone who has really delved quite deeply into the impact of war on our food systems, what would you say the main challenges are that have appeared for food systems since the beginning of 2022 and the full-scale Russian invasion?
Well, it's not an easy question, and I think that I require more time than this panel to answer that. But let me try to summarize it quickly. And let's start with the global challenges, and then move to the local level. But here I'd like to emphasize that the war actually revealed the vulnerability of our present globalized agri-food system that is characterized by the narrow specialization in food production, dependencies on food export, and industrial methods of production. And as you know, Ukraine is a major producer and exporter of grain, primarily wheat, corn, barley, and sunflower. And when the Russian Navy blocked the Black Sea ports, through which 95% of Ukrainian grain used to be shipped abroad, the global agri-food system was, well, not necessarily like collapsed, but seriously disrupted. And in the country, in Ukraine, more than 25 million tons of grain was trapped in silos and in ports during the blockade, while the rest of the world experienced rising food prices and food shortages. And these rising prices were not only affected the most vulnerable populations in Middle East and North Africa, the countries that are the most dependent on food from Ukraine, but they caused problems elsewhere as the consumer prices rose around the world. And in result, according to the UN, the total number of people facing the food insecurity has doubled in the last couple of years. Well, of course, it's not solely because of the war in Ukraine, but also because of the COVID, because of the climate change and other violent conflict. When the global prices for grain have skyrocketed, Ukrainian grain producers weren't able to sell their grain, even at the lowest prices. Moreover, they have to solve their acute problem with the storage of the unsold and unshipped grain, and the existing storage facilities in the country were not sufficient, of course, because all this grain was oriented to be sold and abroad. And the temporary solutions, there was polyethylene storage sleeves and mobile warehouse were placed in the field. Also, the solidarity lane was organized to transport the Ukrainian grain along the inland routes to EU and further on. But that solved the problem only partly. And of course, it's not only the blockade of Black Sea ports that was undertaken by the Russia against Ukrainian agriculture. There are many other cases where the Russian army sets the fire to agricultural fields, uses landmines near the zones of active hostilities, and stores the grains from temporary occupied territories. Also, the shelling of agricultural facilities and infrastructure also became a common tactic of the invaders. So farming in Ukraine became a very dangerous profession. But it's not only the physical destructions and the danger for human lives that brought about by the war, but also there are many indirect problems related to organization of agriculture in Ukraine. And it's primarily related to logistics and also the supply of farm inputs. And as you know, industrial agriculture is highly dependent on fuel and chemical inputs. And it was a huge problem, especially when the war started, because before the war, most of the fuel fertilizers were supplied to Ukraine from Russia and Belarus. And this stopped, of course, and the existing fuel depots, moreover, the existing fuel depots in Ukraine were bombed by the Russian army. And beside that, the tanks and military cars, they run on the same fuel, diesel, as tractors and agricultural machinery. So the farmers were left almost with no fuel in Ukraine. And they have to find the solutions as soon as possible and be flexible and adjust methods. And this flexibility was not so easy for especially big business, because they have complex structure and established technologies. While the large agribusiness was nearly paralyzed in the early months of the war, family farmers and smallholders, they are less dependent on external resources and global trade, so they were able to adjust to extreme conditions, and they produce the food for themselves, their communities, the army, the people in Ukraine. So they demonstrated, and the war has demonstrated, that localized food systems are more resilient and sustainable in terms of crisis. I think that's perhaps the biggest lesson we should learn from it.
Thank you so much, Natalia. We can see that the impacts on food systems in Ukraine are varied, but at the same time, we know it's been a clear demonstration of Ukrainian resilience, and specifically of Ukrainian smallholder farmers, which have sometimes been more adaptable to these changes and challenges. And Natalia, I also was wondering if you could also comment on how all these kind of knock-on effects for the agricultural sector might also be felt in other countries in Eastern Europe, so not just Ukraine, and what sort of transboundary impacts are they facing?
Yeah, certainly. Well, we live in a very globalized and interdependent world, and in terms of agriculture, it's also our current agri-food system is very global, and when one actor falls out, and the whole system gets shuttled. But it's like there are multiple effects, and direct and indirect, and there are just, I will say just few of those. I won't be able to cover all the impact, but like first of all, it's inflation. And the Russia's war in Ukraine provoked an increase in prices, and not only for food, but also for other goods and services. And the farmers in Eastern Europe, they are seeing the impact of inflation today in 5 primary areas. It's a fuel, labor, seeds, chemicals, and fertilizers. And before the war, as in Ukraine, Eastern European farmers, they bought fuel and fertilizers from Russia and Belarus that was not longer available. The prices of the available fuel and fertilizers have increased exponentially. According to the different estimations, the price for fertilizers have increased approximately 100%, like 70 to 110% on average in the past 2 years. and the fuel prices, in particular for diesel, have risen by 70%. So this all drastically increased the production costs and reduced the yields, because not all the farmers were able to afford the inputs in such prices. Inflation also decreased the purchasing power of the consumers, that negatively affects the domestic food market in Eastern Europe. Moreover, the war has created general uncertainty in the Eastern Europe, which has affected the international flow of capital and investment climate in many countries bordering with Ukraine. Currently, we see the loss of foreign direct investment in Eastern European countries, and also agriculture as one of the important spheres of economy. And in terms of political impact, well, it's also partly related to economics, but I think it's better frame it in a political terms. So there, as you know, there were farmers' protests that took place last spring in Poland, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. And as I mentioned earlier, that because of the blockade of the Black Sea ports, Ukrainian grain was transported via Solidarity lane to Europe to be shipped further to Asia, Africa, and Middle East. However, a certain share of it ended up in the European Union, primarily in these bordering countries with Ukraine, because of different reasons. And the inflow of relatively cheap Ukrainian grain to Eastern and Central Europe depressed the local grain prices and left local grain producers unable to sell their crops. And in April, we witnessed a number of farmer protests in Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and they were primarily initiated by large farmer organizations and had a nationalist populist overtones. And the government of those countries, they responded to the farmers' unrest, but largely pursuing their own political agendas. And they introduced a temporary ban on Ukrainian grain, and which European Union had to adopt at the EU level and kept it in effect until September 23. And so these protests and also unilateral bans of Ukrainian grain in Eastern Europe, they have threatened the EU unity and the collective stand for Ukraine. But on the other hand, and I won't go to that into details at all, but maybe Ramona can tell a bit more about that. And on the other hand, there are many initiatives in Eastern Europe that support food producers in Ukraine. And I know Eco Ruralis is doing a lot to help Ukrainian farmers in these difficult times. And
That's right.
yeah, so yeah, I stopped
Okay.
here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can see maybe Ramona hasn't been able to join us yet. But yes, thank you so much for covering that so comprehensively. And you know, we can see how while there has been a lot of unity in terms of the civil society movements, when it comes to facing these challenges to agricultural systems, there are also sort of this turmoil that we're facing in terms of the protests, and something that we need to be considering going forward as we rebuild food systems in Ukraine and also across the region. And for you, Natalia, my final question is about how much you have perhaps seen a change in the rhetoric around the environmental impacts on food systems and, you know, environmental sustainability when it comes to the conversation on impacts of war in the past sort of couple of years.
Yeah, well, there's many outstanding scholars and also institutions that work on those issues of environmental impact and of the war. And Ecodia was doing several presentations, as I heard, at the COP28. So in terms of their impact on the agriculture, like environmental impact agriculture, there are basically, I think, two major categories where we're talking about. It's a physical degradation and chemical pollution of soils and groundwaters as well. So physical degradation, it's a construction of fortification, it's explosion of the craters, and also destruction of the soil by the tanks, tracks, and wheels of military vehicles. So they all destroy their upper nutrient-richer layer of the soil, which leads to their loss of soil fertility and makes the fields unsuitable for agricultural production. And landmine contamination is also a critical issue. It's about now 30 million hectares of land in Ukraine being mined. And in terms of chemical pollution, which also which perhaps even bigger issue, it's caused by heavy metals, missiles, vehicle fuel, and other toxic chemicals that release into the soil. And these chemicals reach the groundwater, and especially in certain areas of Kherson and Mykolaiv Oblast, where the groundwater levels are very close to the surface. And of course, this increases the risk of chemicals being taken to the food, and has a direct impact on people's health and food security. And of course, when we talked about the Ukrainian post-war recovery, we should think not only about their access to certain territories and fields, but also take into account the this environmental impact that to deal with them will require much longer time and more effort, more systematic, and more actors should be involved in that, and in terms of bringing the soils back to the production, and not only physically, what I said, but also in terms of the quality of the soil. And another more perhaps the indirect impact, which I think is also relevant to mention here, is their more intensive use of pesticides and fertilizers by Ukrainian farmers that further contaminate soil and groundwater in those territories that are not affected by the war, because the war brought a lot of uncertainties, and the farmers would prefer to take on more, more chemicals, perhaps, in order to protect their harvest than it used to be before. And the same we see with the use of GMO seeds in Ukraine. Previously, well, GMOs are forbidden in Ukraine, and previously there was a certain obligatory checks of the companies that produce grain, for example, to be GMO free. But now during the war, those checks became voluntary, and not so many companies doing that. So we expect that some of them may use GMOs in their production, because these seeds are more resilient and give the higher yields. And the same thing perhaps happening with pesticides and fertilizers, because all these checks and recommendations are now became very vague. So that also we need to keep in mind in terms of the impact of the war.
Thank you so much, Natalia. We obviously very often talk about the ecocide that is caused by the Russian invasion and how much it's destroying our soils. But at the same time, it's clear that we need to be mindful of the practices that we ourselves are using in the region to make sure that they are sustainable and speed up soil recovery as much as possible, so that we can ensure food security and access to healthier diets, which is the next step. And you've touched upon health a little bit there, but now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who can perhaps shed a little bit more light on the sort of public health nutrition side of things. But before I pass on to Dr. Edmund Fernandez, perhaps a round of applause for Natalia for her comprehensive presentation. Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Edmund Fernandez is the director of the Edward and Cynthia Institute of Public Health, and he was a former consultant to UN ESCAP, and as well a US Department of State Legislative Fellow. His work has impacted 2.9 million people and counting till date, and influenced several policy transitions in public health. So Dr. Edward Fernandez, thank you for joining us, first of all. I wanted to ask you, as someone with so much public health expertise, could you share how the environmental destruction of land and water resources during war can potentially threaten public nutrition?
Thank you, Victoria, for this very pertinent question. And I would probably like to begin with the fact that every war has consequences. And it's not just about economic consequence, but about how social protection at the heart of citizenship is affected and impacted, which would probably take several years to then catch up with. But the most inspiring part of this story is that Ukraine has engaged in green initiatives, which is, of course, the present and the future, both in the context of war and even otherwise. Um, Coming back to the public health impact that this plays out is it's not just about how food security is impacted, but it's also about how health systems are coping up with surge capacities, especially in areas that are getting bombed or that are getting targeted. And this is not just impacting the overall curative side of health, but it's also impacting the mental side of health, which is probably going to leave an impact of a generation. So while we're looking at policy gaps that needs to be addressed out here, in line with global conversations around just transition, we need to look at how public health in all policies of redevelopment and reconstruction can be shaped up. And I don't see a more better platform than how the youth network and the youth initiatives of Ukraine can possibly take the lead in effectively advocating for governments in the national capital to relook at how we retrofit policies around public health, be it in reconstruction, be it in an environment, be it in food security, be it in women and child development, or be it in infrastructure. Over to you again.
Thank you so much. And looking towards a slightly different perspective on food systems, we have with us Eva Karolewska from Poland. Eva is a representative of EIT Food and has for many years worked with innovations and solutions for sustainable development in Poland, Austria, and Dubai. She's worked as a consultant and partnership and business development manager in the private sector. And at EIT Food, she collaborates with the agri-food industry, startups, and other innovators to accelerate innovations in Central and Eastern Europe, as well as Nordic countries. So Eva, from sort of a food policy and food producers perspective, how have you felt the sort of conversations on the environmental sustainability change, and perhaps particularly in Poland specifically?
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're having good time at COPE. Thanks for having me with you. Yes, I would like just to add shortly on what Natalia said and what Dr. Fernandez as well mentioned, that of course the impact of the war is very visible. And also we have to add to this that already we had like a kind of sensitive situation due to the COVID pandemic before, and it impacted, of course, the economies and triggered some negative effects. When it comes to the impact of the war as well, we observe this when it comes to innovation and when it comes to the perception of the whole region, what Natalia mentioned as well before. So, for example, the producers will the risk their decisions, and they will, for example, not decide to open the R&D centers in our region. They will rather think about descaling, for example, the production and go to other places to those places that are perceived to be safer, for example. And of course, what Natalia mentioned as well, it impacts the decisions of investors who are as well looking at the region as the whole. So this is what I just wanted to mention to the previous discussion. And also one little one little thing about EIT food. So what we discuss here, the public health, decarbonization of the food production system, all those things we framed as EIT food into our strategy, and we have 3 main missions. If you have time later, have a look at this, because those 3 missions basically are tackling those topics that we are discussing. So public health, for example, and net zero food systems, and the resilient and transparent and fair food system. When it comes to the policies, of course, there was, in my opinion, things a little bit accelerated because the COVID pandemic and then the war changed the perception, and there was much more focus on the food security. So the food security was a big topic, and not only this, but the food production and food systems as such. So they are coming more to the mainstream. And also when it comes to the discussions on the sustainability, on the impact of the food systems, of the food production. I would say that the main spot at the moment is on the GHG emissions, but of course, within the next years, the other impacts like biodiversity, water, and overall impact on the environment will be more and more present in the discussions and in the policies. When it comes to the European Union, we have kind of sound framework already that derives from the Green Deal. We have the farm to fork strategy. We have also a lot of strategies at the moment, and the roadmaps, and also the tools, concrete tools when it comes to the non-financial reporting. So this year, for example, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive was adopted, and then as well the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And why I'm talking about those things, because they are like very concrete, and they are showing who will have to report within the next year. So we will start, of course, with big companies with big impact on the economies and also on the environment. And year by year, additional groups of companies will be added to that. So the frameworks are here. Companies know that they will have to report. Everybody knows about this. So now the question is how? Big companies that have headquarters in Western Europe already have frameworks ready, and they are adopting those frameworks as well in our region when they are working with the suppliers. I would say when it comes to local and regional leaders, they are already working on the GHG footprint, for example, building the inventories, working on this. Where I see the difficulty is the scope 3 specifically. So all work with the suppliers in those globalized, very complex supply chains, this is something that imposes a big obstacle, I would say. We hear this in the discussions with companies. We try to help them as well as EIT Food. So we are producing different tools in the region. For example, we issued a manual for the carbonization of the food system. We are organizing different discussions. The next, we are planning on the scope 3 exactly to show, how to do this practically. But of course, we have to remember that the times are tough. So the food producers were also impacted by all those negative impacts of the global situation. Of course, the inflation is a big factor here as well, as mentioned Natalia, not only in the region, but in the whole Europe. It's a very, very big topic that is present everywhere, also in Nordic countries that are perceived as very rich and very stable economies. So we have to take this very complex, framework into account, and try to do our best to support the producers, because the impact, everybody, I think, in this room knows the impact of the food production is very, very big on the environment. Yes, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Eva. And you talked about sort of the complexity of global supply chains being an obstacle in implementing some of these European, specifically EU policies. And are you seeing any specific solutions that are being proposed that you think could address this? perhaps specifically proposed by civil society?
I can also mention, what we really like and what we do at EIT Food, we are supporting innovators. So I like to show solutions that are helping in implementing practical changes. We have a lot of solutions already present in our portfolio. We have startups working, for example, on diversified proteins, because as we know, the animal protein is a big source of the impact on the environment. We have startups working as well on solutions when it comes to water, when it comes to fertilizers. We have a lot of solutions coming directly supporting regenerative agriculture. This is a very big topic at EIT Food, not only at EIT Food, but also globally. So, and also what I would like to underline here, we have also solutions at our portfolio of startups that can help with gathering the data, capturing the environmental impact of companies, and it can really help, if companies start working with the suppliers and they impact as well is embedded into those tools, then it's much easier to identify, for example, hotspots and then work on those hotspots, because before knowing even, where are those hotspots, what's going on when it comes to the overall environmental impact of companies, it's really difficult to take steps. So this is what we have as well, what I would like to mention here. And I think what's very important is leading by an example. So we are trying to work with bigger companies to help them as well with this task. And hopefully when we have good cases, we can show them and say, look, they manage those were the obstacles, those are the resources needed. Here you will find practical tools that can help you with this. And here are also the solutions already offered. Of course, another topic is scaling up those solutions, because we have a lot of startups working on different things in the whole Europe, and to have a real impact, they will need to be scaled up and applied more commonly. And here is also the topic of affordability. So all those solutions will need to be more affordable and accessible by companies and also by the consumers at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you so much, Eva, for giving us that perspective in terms of innovation. You've talked about sort of a little bit there, the consumer side of things, and you touched on alternative proteins as one of the solutions, both for sustainability, but also a key sort of investment in terms of transformation for health. And I wanted to pass back to Dr. Fernandez here. How do you, as a public health professional, define sustainable nutrition, and how is it from your perspective that sustainable public health nutrition can have an impact on climate change solutions?
I personally think that sustainable public health nutrition would be an offshoot of every family and every community engaging in low-cost, energy-rich diet. You cannot build alternative proteins as a narrative, because, although there is evidence on the wall that meat products are leading to carbon emissions, but this is also a subtle hypocrisy, because if, as a human being or as a human race, we are looking at reducing meat consumption, on the other side, when the conversation is around planetary health, then what do you feed carnivorous animals? And how are you going to balance the ecosystem that is essentially thriving on meat products as well? This builds a larger conversation around the fact that what do you do with the trade markets, the economy that thrives on meat? But largely sustainable nutrition should be built around behavior change communication, and this would essentially involve touching last mile communities wherein we train them, capacity build them around low-cost dietary components, which will have both the appropriate calorie intake and at the same time micronutrients that not just reduce hunger, but also contribute to effective growth and subsequent milestones needed in the process.
Thank you. I think it's really more important that you mentioned the micronutrients. You know, many people are aware of sort of vitamins and how much we need, you know, the correct intake of them. But very often, like micronutrient deficiencies is something that is underdiagnosed. And I think especially looking at the data from Eastern Europe too, we see that many people are, you know, have micronutrient deficiencies but are not aware of this. And what might be, oh, okay. Okay, I just noticed Eva has her hand up. I will pass on to you in a second. So yeah, so micronutrient deficiencies, but at the same time, climate change and, you know, our unsustainable practices, including in the food and agriculture sector, are driving and contributing to this increasing burden of disease. And I'll pass on to Eva. You have your hand up.
I just wanted to add to what Dr. Fernandez mentioned. Of course, in my opinion, it won't change from one day to another. And when it comes to the diversified protein, different protein sources than animal protein sources, it will take time, and also those things will exist in parallel, obviously. So we work on one hand on diversified proteins. On the other hand, we are working as well hand in hand with the producers of milk, dairy, and meat, so that we support them in uptaking more sustainable practices.
Okay, thank you. And I definitely agree that we need, you know, all these different approaches being explored and, you know, invested into, so that we can, you know, reach as many different people as possible, you know, reach consumers from all walks of life and, you know, all sort of cultural kind of backgrounds, which, you know, definitely affect how we choose food and whether we choose more sustainable food or not. So we've sort of talked about the environmental sensitivity of food systems and also public health nutrition. And before we pass on to the next sort of question, could we just give a round of applause to Dr. Edmund and Eva, because Dr. Edmund will have to rush off soon. All right. So here at COP, we have talked about a holistic approach to food systems as well, as part of the agriculture negotiations. This means obviously working with all stakeholders, as I've just highlighted, from consumers to farmers, to create a framework for more sustainable food production that is also healthier. And I guess in Eastern Europe, we actually do have a lot of community initiatives and projects, and incredibly so, there's a great diversity in Ukraine. And here I will introduce my Ukrainian colleague, Diana Popolushi. Diana is an environmental campaigner and activist. She's got over 10 years of experience in the field of environmental protection. And she has worked with both youth and adults on a variety of different programs, from waste management to you know, different local initiative development. She also works on producing analytical and scientific reports, both with media and also for the sort of public civic sector. And Diana has also worked sort of in the international context, organizing different educational workshops and exchanges and so on. So great to have you on the panel, Diana. And obviously you work with such an incredible sort of variety of community projects. Could you share sort of your perspective on how, even in times of war and economic crisis, communities are mobilizing towards these more agroecological foodways?
Yes, thank you, Victoria, for having me here. And from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, that was hard to recognize for the people who were staying in Ukraine, what should we do? And for myself, I'm from a region which is not that much affected. So from the beginning, we dived into humanitarian aid and helping people, and really neglected a lot of our environmental work, because like, how dare we do something for us, for ourselves? Yes, nature, but still is something I am doing when people are literally dying. But then we realized that our community garden project, it calls Rosadnik, and 2023 was the third season we were working already actively. This is a community garden. We have 1 hectare of territory. These are old ruined greenhouse glass house pavilions from the beginning of the 20th century, actually. And it was really a mess in there, so we cleaned it up. We mobilized a lot of volunteers, a few thousands of volunteers over the 3 years, helped us to build this community garden, because it's more about a community, less about a garden, but I will talk about it later. Still, it's a big component of everything, because it's a glue, like produce and gardening. It's really like the glue that bring in together. And then at the end of March 2022, we got a lot of friends from other cities visiting us, also for work, but also people who have to stay in my city of Lviv, and a lot of eco activists, and they already knew about our project. And then they were asking, why you don't continue? Why you stop this? And then we thought, okay, maybe let's try it. It's an open space, so it's not locked. Yes, there is a little fence over it there, but it wasn't there at this time. But it's still open for the public. And then we tried to invite people. Then we tried to post on social media, okay, come in, we will plan something together. And we were really, it was a surprise that we had dozens of people coming in, mostly internally displaced persons. And they, after the first visit, they were stating that, thank you for giving me a bit of control over my life. So this gardening practice was the only part of their life they could really control. So you have a seed, you put it in the soil, you nourish it, and it's growing, and you follow the process. So this was a really experience of grounding, of therapy. We also held garden therapy workshops in there. This was a place to connect not only with locals, but also with other community members, also from this city, their city. So we had people from Kharkiv and Kyiv meeting in Lviv in a community gardening project. And they continue now, they are back to their cities, and they are continuing now to work together because they met in our community garden, and it's really great. The other aspect is growing food together. We are planning it. Obviously, there are people who are intervening. They are planting what they want, but still we are planning. We are using local seed. We are using seeds from local farmers. They are giving us them, or we are buying from them, and we are also working with them together. We are using locally produced compost. In city of Lviv, we have the only one in Ukraine community food waste treating system, a composting plant, and we are buying compost from them made from local organic matter. So this is also a cool way to see how circular everything is. And we are piloting a lot, because the thing is, you are really afraid to start something if you know that it cannot succeed. So in our community garden, you are allowed to do everything, even if you fail in the end, because a failure is also actually a success, but you have to learn from it. And this is a place we are piloting a lot of initiatives. We are working a lot with nature-based solutions, really, like this is the love of our life. We are also doing a lot of things with local grown crops. And also sharing it together. So volunteers come to us, work with us, and then in the end, even if they are for the first time there, we are sharing the produce we harvested, and they were like, wow, this is so cool. So I see the impact of my work right now, and this is really empowering for them. And this is also a matter of climate change adaptation and mitigation. So we are almost in the middle of the city. We are collecting rainwater. So we are composting. We are using greenhouse gases. We are providing a green space for people who need it. And also we are visited by a lot of people with children, so they can play around, they can stay there, and they don't have to stay somewhere in the bright sun. They have shed in our place there. And also the last thing, but this really important point for me, because I'm also a urbanist in my heart, the right to claim a part of the city, to make the city belong to you, like the right for the city. So here in our community garden, everyone has the same right for this place, and everyone can claim, yeah, this is my place, this is the place I belong, this is the place I can create, and this is also empowering for the people to have something they can rely on.
Well, I mean, that was really inspiring, and you've covered so many things, so many solutions from so many different angles, and I think that's just an amazing example of what holistic, agroecological and all of these different complicated terms means in practice. Because often when we sit in, maybe negotiations or official meetings and policy, we focus so much on, the data and also these complicated terms. But in reality, it's, a sort of this tool for amazing social change. And also sort of Dr. Fernandez was talking about the sort of mental health impacts, and you showed how we can actually approach those even in such difficult conditions as in Ukraine. And we often talk about the sort of difficulties of implementing sort of projects because of lack of access to funding. And I wonder about this community initiative, this community garden, how do you find whether you are facing many funding challenges, or do you find that the community, when they come together, are able to solve this?
Yeah, it's really all about the community. You mentioned it already. So when we are looking for support can be from different points of view. So somebody can help with hands, somebody can help with money, somebody bring crops, somebody brings seeds, and everything works really good together. It's really like a clockwork system. So all together we are creating parts of our garden. So I'm, for example, like more responsible for this international stuff, and work with youth. Also, we had a book club there, and also I'm raising from time to time money, but we have colleagues who are really working with documents, who are applying for funding. And this is also a big part of it, because when you're talking about this, even so small community gardening projects, there has to be a core person or better persons, not to rely on one person that much, to organize everything. So even if it kind of looks decentralized, it is, but still there has to be somebody who is keeping track of everything. And the core person or persons, like in our case, we are like the 4 persons and then a team of volunteers. We are bringing together on the missing pieces into this.
Okay, thank you so much. I can see Eva has her hand up again.
Yes, first of all, I really like what you've been doing, Diana. I like this like holistic approach to looking at the waste, looking at this mental health aspect as well, and getting engaged as well, people from the urban communities that are sometimes very detached from the food production. I just would like to mention as well that when we were planning activities in last year, we also didn't know what we should what we could do in Ukraine. We organized workshops for entrepreneurs and for startups last year. We really didn't know what to expect. It turned out really great. We have amazing partners in Ukraine, and we had massive interest from the community. It turned out that really people need this. They need, to work on what they've been doing before the war started. Some people were displaced, of course. Some people had to go to the war, but the ecosystem, innovative ecosystem, was still there and needed, this even not the support, but even a sense of the connection with the rest so much. So our activities last year were really turned out very successful. We organized even more this year. And we organize as well activities targeting directly or mentioning directly issues that Natalia before discussed. So the soil recovery, for example, or demining the fields, things that we wouldn't, even think of before the war. So yeah, this year we did more. Next year we'll do for sure a lot of, but we were extremely happy with the performance, despite the harsh situation, despite the fact that people didn't have connectivity always or electricity, because of the alarms and things like this.
Of course. Thank you so much, Eva, for complimenting what Diana has been talking about. And also, I can see that Natalia has her hand up. Perhaps if you say, if you comment just very briefly.
Well, thank you. Yes, I will do the very brief comment then. And I was really pleased to hear about Diana's initiative, the Rasadnik, and that it's a successful initiative. And I've been studying several other initiatives across Ukraine, and what war demonstrated that people are really able to come together and overcome their differences and to produce food, and not only for themselves, but also for the communities around, for internally displaced persons, and also to send to the army, to Ukrainian army fighting in the front line. And I think it's a really great thing what's going on. I mean, with all their terrible consequences of the war was able to provoke this enormous solidarity and collective action in Ukraine, both in urban and rural areas. And I don't know, I don't see Ramona right now yet, but I mean, may I mention a short about the food sovereignty. And I think it's a very important idea for Eastern Europe as well, although it's not so widely used by the movements and by the practitioners themselves. But this is the right of people to the culturally appropriate food and the right to control their own food system. And this is what we see there is getting in more and more popular ideas, even so people maybe not talking about this as such. And I think that's the important transformation that we are observing nowadays in our food systems, and it's worth mentioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. I think we can see how, how much communities are doing for food systems transformation, no matter what challenges they are facing. And there's, this, we can see this from the more sort of research academic perspective, and also from the perspective of business and innovation. But now I'd like to sort of zoom out a little bit. And before we do that, let's give a round of applause for this segment of the discussion and our wonderful speakers. Okay, so now we've sort of talked about a little bit the importance of nature-based solutions and for communities, but those community initiatives and also local startups, in order to be scaled up, they still need some sort of top-down support to ensure that the bottom-up initiatives live on. And we have with us Franziska Tannerberger. She is a peatland scientist and lecturer from Germany, from Greifswald University. She is also the director of the Greifswald Meyer Center. And for more than 20 years, she has carried out research and conservation projects in Eastern Europe. She is also a advisor to the German government in the German Council on Sustainable Development. So it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. So you advocate for nature-based solutions in order to conserve water resources. Obviously, water scarcity is a huge issue that we're facing now with climate change. And for this, we need, better water and land management. But for you, how what is your perspective on why this is important for food security? And from your experience in Eastern Europe, why is it so important for the region?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I joined this spontaneously because I think it's a good opportunity to bring in this topic. And maybe not everybody is actually aware of peatlands. I think it's Torfowicze in Ukrainian or Torfowisko in Polish. It's a widespread ecosystem actually in Eastern Europe, and it has two phases in a way. It is a natural carbon sink. And I mean, we are discussing here technical solutions, CCS and so on, but a few other people said already, I mean, nature is our best technology. We have a natural sink already, but we are destroying it. Still not in Europe, but in other continents. And in Europe, we have drained it a lot for agriculture. So there's a clear link with agriculture. And these peat soils used for agriculture are hotspots for emissions. And just a few numbers, maybe the biggest. So on average, it's in many countries and worldwide, 5% of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's not a huge amount, but it's a substantial amount. And to become net zero, we need to bring it down to zero, of course. And the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in Europe from peat soils is Russia, followed by Belarus. But then Germany comes in, so I can blame my own country a lot. Finland, and then Poland, actually, and also UK, Ireland, and Ukraine. And in all these countries, many of these areas are drained. And one fact that I think is not known to many people, the emissions from these drained agriculturally used lands are not reported in the agriculture sector. So you do not see them in the greenhouse gas inventory under agriculture, but in the LULUCF sector. So you have to do an additional effort actually to see these emissions, because in LULUCF they are combined with the forest sink, and there's one total figure, forests and drained peatlands. So that makes it a bit complicated. And so they are widespread. And what is the relationship to food? I mean, we produce food on drained peatlands. We have a lot of milk production, for example, in many countries, also in my country. This has to stop. I mean, we need to stop these emissions, and we cannot afford as a society to continue to let these soils emit CO2. So we need a smart shift of land use from the peat soils to mineral soils for food production. But maybe we can use the peat soils for renewable energies, for also solar energy maybe, and for producing building materials, for example. So there are a lot of such solutions coming up at the moment to continue wet agriculture. And we just heard about it today in an earlier event here. And it's also important to say, if we continue to drain the lands, at some point food production will no longer be possible, because then the peat layer is fully decomposed, actually. It's released as CO2 and the carbon has disappeared, and then we have sand underneath, for example, and it's not very productive for food production. And then we produce food actually with peat, so as a substrate. We discussed gardening already, so there is still a use. And I mean, I would say in private gardening, there is no need for peat at all. We have alternative substrate compost. We can do our own compost. So that's very good to hear about your initiative. In industrial gardening, they still claim there is nothing that compares to peat, to white peat. But there is a solution as well. We can farm peat mosses, sphagnum mosses on wet peatlands, and then cut the uppermost layer and use it as an alternative substrate. That's called sphagnum cultivation. And this is also starting to work, because also in Germany, we are very much eager to stop peat extraction fully and not to import from the Baltic states, as we do at the moment, from Lithuania and Latvia a lot. And that's a big relationship. And then the third layer is that mineral land used for food production that is close to peatlands, it benefits from wet peatlands because they keep the water in the landscape, they prevent droughts, they act a bit like sponges. And they also store groundwater underneath. So they have a very positive effect on the landscape water balance. And this is often not seen yet. So, and also our landscapes, also speaking about my country again, is very much managed to drain it quickly. But now we are getting into a period of droughts with climate change. So we need to hold the water back in the landscape. And that is a big relation to food production. But as I said, it has many different shades actually. And it's a challenge for food production.
Thank you so much, Franziska. That was actually really interesting, and a lot of concepts that I personally, as someone from a little bit more of a public health sort of background, don't consider so much. And I was just wondering, in terms of, you talked about the sort of maybe industrial food production issues. We talked about how, you know, peat is not necessary so much for community gardening, but do you see that there is much dialogue between these smaller community producers and maybe industry in terms of water management and how they can work together in terms of improving this in policy or in practice?
So the tricky thing with peatlands is also that you need to have consensus with all landowners actually to rebut it, because you cannot rebut a single land parcel in it. Then you have to build a new dike around it. So it's very much about cooperation between people. So that's what I personally like a lot, because that's also a challenge, a nice challenge. But at the same time, you cannot, like afforestation, just afforest a piece of land. You need to find this consensus. And then, at least in many European countries, I mean, now also Eastern European countries, the common agricultural policy of the European Union is very decisive on what happens on these soils. And so far, it is just encouraging drainage. You get all the subsidies that you can get on drained peat soils, which is a kind of perverse subsidies, because you subsidize land use that is emitting a lot of CO2. And since this funding period, there's also the common agricultural policy opened for paludiculture and for wetland use, but it's still a risk for farmers. So you have to be very brave actually as a farmer to shift to it now. There's a lot of risks involved. And that's why we try to encourage, first of all, the governments actually to take it up as a task, because also all the drainage in the past, it was motivated by the governments and not by individual people. And now they have to find a way. But I also see startups coming up and local communities. So we have local initiatives between farmer associations, between those entities dealing with water, with clean water as well, and with schools, for example, to move forward in this respect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Before this panel discussion, I was just talking to Franziska about this concept of One Health. And One Health is something that is talked about both in the food sector and in the public health sector. So this idea that human health, animal health, as well as the health of our environment are all interlinked, and therefore all of these sort of stakeholders and people involved in all of these disciplines must work together. How do you believe these sort of water and land management approaches contribute to a One Health approach?
Yeah, thank you. We are also, I mean, I come from peatland science. I've studied peatland species diversity, and now we are still also more and more realizing how deeply this is connected. And I think it's a very good example for a holistic approach, for a systemic approach. We need to look, I mean, how our natural environment looked like in the past. And I mean, these peatlands, they have formed in river valleys, along the coasts or on the mountainsides where we have a lot of precipitation. And if we work against nature, it will not lead us very far, probably, or we see the consequences already. And in turn, we can get a lot of benefits for human health as well. So for peatlands, I would like to mention really the cooling effect. So they have a lot of evapotranspirative cooling from these wetlands, and we need cooling as well. And you also realize it everywhere that this is much more needed. They also contribute to clean water, which is a big issue because the drained peatlands release nitrate a lot. And if you recall, in the Netherlands, for example, there were big farmer protests as well and big demonstrations against the governments and so on. That was all about nitrate, and a lot nitrate from drained peatlands, actually. And I mean, of course, animal husbandry. And then a third thing that is really also important in many Eastern European countries is fires, spontaneous wildfires from drained peat soils. There was this issue. I mean, I was just coming from a meeting with Indonesian colleagues. In Indonesia, the haze from these fires of drained peatlands is really a big health issue, and there have really thousands and thousands of people died from the effects. And in some other countries, it is also a big reason to release pollutants from the soil, actually, and also maybe pollution from radioactivity around nuclear power plants. So because they are often, I mean, nuclear power plants are usually close to water built because they need the cooling water, and where you have water, you have also peatlands usually. So that is very much connected. So there are many reasons also in terms of One Health's view on it to say we need revetting of peatlands, we need restoration to wilderness areas in some parts of our landscapes, and in other parts we can actually use this idea of paludiculture to continue farming, to continue finding an income for local people, local communities, but under wet conditions with all the better ecosystem services from the wet peatlands.
Thank you. Just recalling that you've worked together with the German government before, and sort of looking at sustainability and sustainable development. And I was wondering whether what your view is on maybe the challenges of the common agricultural policy when it comes to improving these land and water management policies at the moment, because for Ukraine and some other Eastern European countries, the process of and the challenges of integration with the EU, are a hot topic. And do you believe that this sort of I guess the CAP can have a big sort of positive impact on Eastern European agri-food systems after EU integration?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think it would take ages to discuss it probably. Also, I mean, the entire integration of Ukraine in the common agricultural policy, I think this is something that is really challenging. But what I would maybe only stress now is that we have diverging policies. There's not, so for many issues we are discussing here, actually, there's not yet a good mainstreaming of the policy. So partly they are actually leading into different directions, and that makes it even more complicated then to fit now to the European regulatory framework, actually, because on the one hand side, you have all the Green Deal stuff, they have the LULUCF regulation, you have the common agricultural policy that is actually leading a bit into a different direction. Now the nature restoration law is being discussed. There's regulation on circularity. So it's very complicated, I would say. But yeah, I think that hopefully for you really, I mean, we discussed forests here earlier. Now we are discussing peatlands, we are discussing water. I think the science is clear what is actually needed, what to move forward. Policies are not always very clear, but if you stick also to a very much science-based approach, actually, and a lot of exchange also with scientific organizations and bodies, I think that may be a good solution.
Yeah, that was really a very complicated question, but you answered it beautifully. And very sadly, one of our speakers, Ramona, wasn't able to join us. But maybe the speakers that are with us, I was wondering whether you would like to comment on anything that we've already discussed, perhaps give any sort of short statement or reflect on our discussion so far. Oh, Natalia, your hand shut up first.
Yes, thank you. I was just following the last speaker on the integration and accession of Ukraine to European Union and how this would look in the future. And my colleagues and I, we have recently published a report on Ukrainian agriculture in wartime at the TNI website, and we actually analyzed the policies of Ukraine during the war and post-war recovery programs and how they addressed the interest of smallholders versus large-scale industrial agribusiness. And you know, I think you already get the understanding, you know, those who are not in know the Ukrainian context, that Ukrainian agriculture consists of two different forms or models of production. It's large-scale industrial agribusiness and in small-scale family farmers. And through all the years, the government been supporting and seeing the large-scale industrial agribusiness as the way forward, as a way to bring Ukraine to, you know, successful agricultural development. And however, as in many examples and has shown that smallholders actually, what I mentioned earlier, more resilient and resistant in times of crises. And these are those people who produced the food for domestic markets, and they should be get in central position in Ukraine's recovery after the war. And currently, the Ukrainian government is dealing with the dilemma whether to focus on large or refocus on small producers. But if we talk about Ukrainian Euro integration and accession to EU in the future, the government has to give the priority to the farmer-central model in order to be consistent with an common agricultural policies, and this would require a serious choice and transformation, because a large big business that are in power in Ukraine for many years, and they won't be able to stay in power when Ukraine joins in the EU. And how the government and different stakeholders of Ukrainian agriculture will manage to solve this issue and to reorient to the family farming, that's a question. And it's very interesting also to see which interest will dominate in this transition. But it's a critical moment right now in terms of for Ukrainian agriculture. And we hope, I mean, some of the academics that are sympathetic to small scale farmers, and as I am, and also different civil society organizations that support the interest of smallholders in Ukraine, we hope that the government will give more prominent role to smallholders in the future, because they are those who are sustainable in terms of social, economic, and environmental sustainability, and they are those who feed Ukraine, and before the war and during and after. Thank you
so much, Natalia. Does anyone have a response to this, or would like to add anything briefly as well? No? Okay. I think perhaps since our final speaker hasn't been able to join us, we will be able to round up here. I believe our conversation is being recorded, so I will be able to share it with all of us, and you're welcome to share it within all our networks. It's definitely true that the Eastern European context often perhaps receives a little less interest than some others, but our event has really shown that a lot is going on in our region, a lot of community initiatives, a lot of work of the business, and we see the shortcomings, of course, but this awareness is really key in terms of enabling the change that we need towards, you know, the holistic food systems, the better public health and nutrition, and better food security. And I can see finally, perhaps Eva would like to add something.
Just a very short thing. I would like to say that, okay, we discuss a lot of environmental impact. We discuss a lot of negative aspects coming from the food production, but I think it's very positive that actually we discuss this, and it's kind of, you know, like thing that is obvious for everybody. And now we are looking for the solutions. There is kind of agreement about this, that there is an impact, that we have to change, you know, the food system and so on. And now we are looking to create collaborations to change this and to have a, you know, some positive changes for this one.
Thank you, Eva. And also Dr. Fernandez would like to say a couple of words.
No, just a final comment with the spotlight now on COP29 in Azerbaijan. I think it's Eastern Europe's golden moment to integrate public health, food security, environment, and sustainable solutions for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And I definitely agree with all of those points. We can see that at this COP, at COP28, Eastern European countries have shown some leaderships, perhaps unexpectedly, in making commitments to more sustainable food and agricultural systems, as well as commitments to improving the situation with health impacts of climate. So like, for example, Ukraine has signed both the Declaration on Climate and Health, sort of spearheaded by the UAE, and the Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Food, and so on. And so have other countries, you know, some of them have maybe signed one or the other. But as we've already said, there's work to be done to ensure that we stick to those commitments, or our countries make those commitments in the first place. So I guess if nobody has anything to add, I suppose we can end here. And I want to say a massive thank you to our speakers who have, you know, communicated their points so eloquently and so clearly from such different perspectives. So thank you very much. And I hope we can continue collaborating on these solutions for both food security and health together. Thank you. And a round of applause to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you for organizing that. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.